Examining offensive line recruiting, there are certain programs that are pulling ahead, and that's going to give them an edge in the college football playoff.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal scoop. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. O-line recruiting. I'm going to be doing a series on it and eventually talk about the entirety of the Power Four. Today is a major chunk of some of the elite programs with offensive line recruiting, and at least some that should be as well. And why they're faltering as a program, it starts with O-line. We're going to talk about both of those things today. Talk about overall numbers. How many do you need to sign over a 4 or 5 year window to put yourself in position to be a year in, year out trench program? Those that don't do well along the offensive line, to be really honest, they don't have much of a shot to even make the playoff, let alone make a run at a national championship. So a few things to note right off the top. I'm using 24/7 sports rankings, not the composite, just straight up 24/7 from 2021 through 2025. All the numbers I have are from those years and from 24/7. I could have used another barometer, but I want consistency, so that's what I'm going with. Number two, it's about consistency overall. You'll hear me say this several times. A lot of people look at recruiting rankings as a whole over a 2-year window, and absolutely I agree with that. But you can also break it down into offensive line. If you have a 2-year window with fewer than 8 offensive line recruits, you might be able to get away with it. But if you're below 7 in a 2-year window, that can be concerning. And if you're below 6 or something like that, it's a problem. So keep that in mind. You want to have consistency because O-line takes longer to develop. It's more about strength gains. It's more about knowing the person next to you. Consistency, day in, day out work. Like a receiver can be really, really good and carry a unit. Offensive line, you could have one great offensive lineman and have the worst team in the league at the offensive line position as a whole. Continuity at that spot, depth, all those things come together, and it's why recruiting numbers is very valuable. Talent comes above all else. I truly understand that. But if you do not have numbers, you're going to have problems. And even if you do get numbers, sometimes it doesn't work out so well. There's one school in particular that's setting a trend there that is mind-blowing. We'll get to that in just a little bit. A couple other notes. It is the long game. You're not going to see a lot of freshmen walk in and play right away. The elite guys, Will Campbell, just played at LSU for 3 years from 22 through 24. He was an elite recruit offered by schools across the country, comes out of the Monroe, Louisiana area, and he ends up being a stud, starts for 3 years for the Tigers, 4th pick in the draft. Okay, that's the exception, not the rule. Most guys, it'll take till their 3rd year. So again, consistency, juniors, seniors, 5th-year seniors. That's what you really want on the offensive line. And then again, over a 5-year period, you'd like to be around 20 linemen that you signed for a year on average, if you can. So here are a few notes on the schools that I have for today. And I've got several, and these are not going to be surprising programs that I would talk about. Miami, Florida, and Florida State from the Sunshine State. Clemson, Georgia, Bama, LSU, Notre Dame, and Southern Cal. So we got a little variety. Programs that play against each other, programs that are in the same league, some that just recruit against each other, but there's a little bit of variety. These are 10 of the best programs in the country historically at putting guys into the NFL regardless of position. O-line is part of that. There are some ebbs and flows here. And I just want to give a couple of notes just to show you how wild O-line recruiting can be and how it can impact your football program. Let's start off with Southern Cal. In 2022, that recruiting class, Southern Cal signed literally 0 high school offensive linemen. 0. They had a JUCO, but they didn't sign a high school player. How can a team that was as dominant as it could possibly be with offensive linemen, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then even in the Pete Carroll era, just dominant up front, have 0? It is mind-blowing. but they did. Florida State in 2021 and 22, there's that back-to-back class. They met the metric that you want. They had 8 linemen signed. That's good. The problem, out of those 8 linemen, 0 are still residing with the program. That would be their seniors and fifth-year seniors. That's the moment that I mentioned just a little bit ago, talking about a trend you don't want for a program. That was it. 0 seniors and fifth-year seniors for Florida State from the 21 and 22 group. Not a single O-line recruit is still in Tallahassee. That might be the worst O-line recruiting stat that I've seen for a major program in a long time. And a lot of that's just bad luck. Kids that just washed out, didn't want to make it. You got to put in the effort. And it just didn't work out for Florida State. And part of that's recruiting too. You've got to recruit the right guys for your program, but it's a little of both. Bad luck for the Noles. LSU. Not only did they lose Will Campbell, they lost their other offensive lineman to the draft as well. Sometimes when you recruit really well, you also get bit. It's one thing to lose an offensive tackle to the draft early. To lose 2, I'm curious to see LSU this upcoming season. They did a great job. They've recruited O-line, and I'll go over all the numbers for these schools here in a moment. They've done a great job, but losing 2 NFL players at tackle in the same year early, that sucks. And here's the other part. They had a guy that was a year younger, was a 5-star guy. Because he wasn't going to start at tackle last year, he transferred. So you lost 3 high-level tackles in about a year's time, all underclassmen. That is a very odd number. But LSU is one of the few schools that can, quote-unquote, absorb that kind of loss and still be good. I still think they'll be in the playoff hunt. But if they'd have kept even one of those guys, they'd have been in a lot better shape. Miami. They have done as good a job, if not better, than anybody over the last 3 to 4 years at not only recruiting, but specifically finding players that fit their program. Here's an example. Inez Cooper comes in, starts as a sophomore. He was a 3-star out of the greater Birmingham area. He goes down to Miami. He started as a sophomore, started as a junior. He's going to be a senior this year. He's a possible All-American, but a 3-star guy. They also signed Matthew McCoy from up around the Jacksonville area. He's a guy that's competing for the other guard spot at Miami, but both of them were ranked a 3-star by 24/7. 2-man class is small, but a 2-man class with a couple of 3-star guys, that's very risky. But it looks like Alex Mirabal and the O-line at Miami are going to be just fine. Obviously, they got Francis Malinoa in the class right after that. That kind of helps too. And even though Okunlola, the other 5-star kid they signed in 23, has had injury problems, hasn't made it yet, that's still a really good 2-year group. Sometimes it just works out unusual ways. Even though Miami had a 2-man class, it ends up working out for them, and they got one of the best offensive lines in college football. Congrats to the Canes. Overall, looking at the numbers, there are 3 schools that kind of stood out in terms of volume and hitting. These won't surprise you. Georgia, Bama, and Notre Dame. Georgia had an 8-man class in 2024, so we need another year probably to see what's going to happen. 1 or 2 of those guys might play this year, but let's see where they are in 2026. Obviously, last year was a down year for the UGA program in terms of running the ball. They only average 125 yards a game on the ground. That is very low for an SEC football power. It'll get better this year, but let's see where it goes. Alabama, they had 5 5-star offensive linemen in a 5-year period out of 21 guys signed. That is mind-blowing. Notre Dame, according to 24/7, they didn't sign any true 5-stars, but they had a whole bunch of guys that were close to it, and a total of 16 4-star offensive linemen signed in a 5-year period. That is the highest total of any school, including Bama and Georgia. Notre Dame's consistency year to year is also something to note. I'll talk about that a little bit. But if you want to look at a microcosm of how to build your offensive line, Notre Dame would be a pretty darn good place to start. The opposite of that is Florida. They've signed some pretty good guys, but their up and down recruiting is quite honestly very similar to Florida State. And if they can find a couple of guys to get over the hump this year, maybe they surpass expectations, it'll be okay. But that might be their biggest difficulty this year. They've got some talent, but if they don't have any problems with injuries, we can alleviate this question. But are they going to have enough depth to get through that brutal schedule again this year? Out of conference game against Florida State, out of conference game against Miami. It's one of college football's most difficult. Their O-line recruiting at best has been inconsistent. Again, that's going to be a big challenge for the Gators. Finally, another school similar to Notre Dame with consistency is Clemson, and it's twofold. They're the program that we all know. They're not exactly portal friendly. I'm being very kind. I don't believe they've ever taken a scholarship offensive lineman. If they have, I missed it. But they've gotten 18 guys in a 5-year window. That's a pretty low total, but they've also lost very few players. They have a bunch of juniors, seniors, and fifth-year seniors on their two deep. If you keep the guys around, you can get away with lower totals. Dabo Sweeney does it a little bit different, so it is a truly unusual game. When we come back, I'm going to break down the numbers for all these programs and kind of go through which ones hit and why. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can buy more food, more souvenirs, drinks, or anything else you want. Maybe even bring a few more people along with you to the game. Game Time makes it a lot easier for you to do it, no matter your decision. Game Time also makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually go down as you get closer to first pitch, and they get incredible last-minute deal opportunities for you, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. For me, the best thing about Game Time is the actual app. It's very fast, and you can click on a seat, and on your phone, you can see your seat to the pitcher's mound or whatever event you're at. A rock concert, it could be a play, it could be a movie theater. You can see the venue and the view. That's awesome. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Please like and subscribe. We're going to have all kinds of different lists and charts, everything as we close in finally on the college football season. Now let's break down some data. This is my stuff, and it's a little nerdy, but it just shows you the raw volume, like how many kids did so-and-so sign compared to another school. It's a lot of fun for me. I don't know how many of you look at raw numbers sometimes or which database you go with, but I'm just going to kind of go through this. Alabama first. This is no specific order, by the way. Over the 21 to 25 recruiting classes, those 5 years, 21 total players, 5 5-stars, 10 4-stars, and far as 3 stars, only 6 guys. If you talk about high end just consistently, Bama, they had the most 5 stars by far, and they also had the most consistency year to year with totals. They only had 1 year they didn't sign at least 4 guys, and that was the 2024 class. So they found a way to make it work for them, and they should have, especially with Caden Proctor being their left tackle this year, conservatively a top 5 offensive line, I would imagine. But again, it's Alabama. You really shouldn't be shocked by that. Next up, Georgia. This is an interesting one because Georgia's numbers, just sheer volume, are really high. But at the same time, last year, again, they didn't meet Georgia standards. They're probably an interesting case study, if you will. 27 players signed over a 5-year period. That's the most on this list. And they also had their fair share of high-quality players. 2 5-stars, according to 24/7. 12 of them were 4 stars and 12 3-stars. So they took a few guys kind of under the radar, and even one guy that wasn't ranked, a kid out at Warner Robins High. He didn't even make my chart. But 27 overall, and they recruit their guys. They want size. They take players that are massive. They took multiple guys over 350. They run more than any other program in the country. I don't know what the reasoning for that is, but based on Kirby's success at UGA, kind of hard to argue. So a guy that comes in at 360 in 6 months, he'll end up being 320 pounds and be in a lot better shape. That's just their philosophy. But now they've got to show that they can get it done. And again, they've had consistency with numbers. They've only had 1 class in 5 years with just 4 guys. And that's a 21 class. That would be this year's 5th-year seniors. But they need some guys to kind of hit. on some of those younger guys. Like, again, 8 players signed in 2024 along the offensive line for Kirby's crew. Let's see what they do this year. But starting in 26, I'd imagine they're going to be pretty dominant once again. Florida, this is the program that it surprised me maybe the most out of this entire list that I went and looked at. They don't have any 5 stars. Florida is, in my opinion, one of the 5 easiest schools to recruit to in the country. It's in the SEC. It's in Florida. They got history. They got the swamp. It's not that difficult. They don't have any 5-star guys. And only 5 players that ranked as 4 stars along the offensive line by 24/7 Sports. That is a really low total. They had one guy that wasn't ranked. They had a lot of talent that was kind of like high 3-star, but big guys. They're similar in some ways to what Georgia does. They want size, they want length, but they develop a little bit differently. If they don't hit this year, it would be kind of surprising. You would think eventually they'd kind of get over the top, just law of averages, because their O-line has been so consistent the last few years. Hopefully for them, it works out. They do have Jake Slaughter at the pivot, who's arguably college football's best center, but I'm not sure where they are because they're so inconsistent game to game. But their numbers, again, just 5 guys that are 4 stars, no 5 stars at Florida. That's pretty disappointing. We'll see how that ends up going this year. But again, they do have Slaughter, an All-American, at the pivot. Florida State really isn't much different than UF. They had 7 4-star guys. And again, to reiterate what I mentioned at the top, the 2021 and 2022 classes combined, there are 8 guys. 0 of those players are still in the Florida State program. How does that happen? That is just unbelievable. But we'll see. They got 4 transfers this year. It's almost impossible to grade Florida State on high school recruiting because on the line, they've just used the portal so much. But they still had 18 signees, which is a little low, but not atrocious by any means, along the offensive line over a 5-year period. 7 4-stars, 11 3-stars. Miami, same total, 18, 2 5-stars, 4 4-stars, 12 3-stars for 18 in total. But here's the biggest thing with them. Again, Matthew McCoy might start this year. He was a 3-star kid. And they also have Ines Cooper, who's an NFL guy, most likely, barring something unforeseen, going to be a 3-year starter. That's your 2-man class that were both 3 stars in 2022. Alex Mirabal knows what he's doing. I'm not as concerned when I see a kid ranked lower and Mirabal takes that kid at Miami because his eye for talent is tremendous and he's a really good developer. And obviously Mario Cristobal played O-line at Miami. He's a proud O-line guy, but they still didn't really kill it in recruiting. They had 12 3-stars. 2/3 of their O-line recruits were just 3 stars, according to 24/7. But at the same time, the one they really hit on is Francis Malinoa. That's going to be a long-time NFL guy. No doubt about it. Saw him about a month ago, and he's doing well. He's about 335 pounds, and he is svelte. I have a feeling he's going to be a top 10 pick. Look for Miami to use that to launch their recruiting in the future, too, because there's no reason to think that they're not going to continue to do well, including the 26 class, which we'll be talking about at this time next year. So overall, Miami's development, the ability to pick kids, regardless of what the recruiting rankings say, might be the best in the country over the last 5 years. They've done a really good job. Clemson, continuity, man. This is ridiculous. 1 5-star, that's not a bad thing. They only got 1, but it's hard to get them. 9 4-stars, 8 3-stars. Again, 18 is the total. But the biggest thing is the O-linemen just don't leave like they do at other programs. Florida State had those 8 kids leave. Clemson didn't. They've got a bunch of guys that are juniors, seniors, and 5th-year seniors on their 2 deep. Forget about the recruiting rankings. When you get that much continuity, you could have a say in who is the best offensive line in the country. And Clemson right now, for whatever reason, is not getting enough credit for that, especially as it relates to enduring injuries. Clemson's a top 3 or 4 program in the country at offensive line in that regard. I don't know if they've got a true like Caden Proctor per se or Jake Slaughter, somebody like that, but they've got some pretty good alignment across the board. And if you guys are going to get drafted and they don't have a spot where you go, well, there's a problem there. They're deep, they're balanced, they're experienced. Clemson's O-line recruiting has been absolutely tremendous. So hats off to them. LSU already talked about quite a bit. 1 5-star, 10 4-stars, 10 3-stars, 21 overall. But they're a very unique study within themselves, again, because they lost both tackles early in the draft. So it's kind of hard to grade them for this upcoming season. That's a lot to lose, especially the 4th overall pick in the National Football League draft. I'm not sure what to expect this year because continuity, again, is such a powerful part of the equation. If I were to guess, though, Brian Kelly's always been a very heavy O-line guy. He was when he was at Notre Dame. He has been at LSU too, developing guys. They'll figure it out, but I can't see them being on the same level. You can't just lose 2 offensive tackles to the draft. You go, would it be just the same? Probably a small step back, but they obviously have an elite quarterback and a ridiculous amount of skill talent. So LSU's done well, and they'll continue to do well, but this year might be a small step back for their offensive line. Notre Dame, 16 4-stars, 7 3-stars, 23 players overall. A few of the kids that 24/7 had ranked as 4-stars. Ida had 5, including Blake Fisher, but they just consistently churn out elite program building players every year. They did not have a recruiting class in 5 years. They didn't have at least 1 4-star, and except for the 1 year, they had at least 3 4-stars in every class otherwise. 4, 5, 3, 1, and 3. So when you do that, you're probably going to have some success. Notre Dame's offensive line this year is loaded again. I would imagine that they're going to be a top 5 program along the offensive line. And the way they're recruiting it now, they got 6 in the class of 2026 as well. Notre Dame's going to be in the hunt for top 5 status for the foreseeable future. And it'll be pretty interesting this year because they're an experienced group. They have a lot of guys with a lot of size. It is in at least a competition for the Joe Moore Award this year. If I had to lean in a direction, it'd be Penn State, which will be in part 2 of this, but Notre Dame is certainly up there towards the top. And then Southern Cal, the one I was complaining about earlier, because I just don't understand how a school with this much history had that 2022 class. They signed a JUCO kid, but they did not have a single high school lineman for me to even put a number on there. I got goose eggs across my spreadsheet. But overall, no 5-stars, only 5 4-stars at USC along the offensive line in a 5-year period. That's pretty darn low. 12 3-stars and a couple guys that weren't ranked. But here's the deal. It's USC. This shouldn't have happened. Lincoln Riley needs to absorb part of this. He wasn't there for the whole deal, but most of it, it shouldn't be that hard. They've missed out on too many kids locally, LA, San Diego, etc. And I don't know why. That's a problem that they're fixing. This class they're having right now in 26 is much better. They've got several pretty good offensive linemen, including 1 5-star. But I need to see this multiple years for me to believe the USC is going to be a playoff level team again. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine they're going to have to find a way pretty soon to fix that because the natives are getting restless. I don't know what they're going to do this year. They've got a tough schedule, but I don't think they're going to make the playoff this year either. And a big part of it is the offensive line. When we come back, I'm going to have some final thoughts on this and why I think offensive line is so valuable when you look at recruiting rankings. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. What's the most important position in football? Quarterback. Who keeps that quarterback upright? The offensive line. Sure, your running backs and tight ends will help out once in a while, maybe an occasional block from a receiver, but your linemen protect the most important position in football. That's why I chart offensive line recruiting. That's why I look at it. And here's the final piece to the puzzle. I've had 100 million people ask me this question, it seems like, obviously I'm being a little over the top, but why do the better offensive linemen that are still sitting on the second or third team at any given college football program stay on that roster and not enter the portal? I have no idea what it is. Maybe it's a continuity thing. Maybe it's a bonding thing. But the better offensive linemen, especially those with a lot of upside, wait it out. So if you miss on high school offensive linemen, you don't get enough numbers or you just have bad luck with injuries, whatever it is, more often than not, that program is going to be in a very tough spot in 2 or 3 years. It's just the way it is. Every year, you should shoot for at least 4 offensive linemen just to keep the numbers stacked and play with, quite honestly, juniors, seniors, fifth-year seniors. The programs that do that, they're going to have the best opportunity to make the playoff and make a run. Here's the final part to making that run. Do you want veterans on the field if you were fortunate enough to make the final 8, maybe even the final 4? Or do you want a true freshman, even if it's a 5-star? That would make me a little nervous. Consistent recruiting, allowing players to mature on and off the field and in the weight room, by the way, is the most important aspect of O-line development. It's all those things blended together. It's no little part here or there. They're all important, but without that full equation, you're probably not going to have an offensive line that can make it into the playoff, let alone really make a run. Look at Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. Those programs last year made the Final Four, and they all do a great job with offensive line recruiting. They recruit primarily from the high school ranks. Occasionally, they'll take a portal guy. They've all done it. But it's not the norm. And they have the continuity, they have the veteran leadership, and they've got the girth and size to just run over teams with outside zone, inside zone, duo, trap, just basic plays. Offensive line recruiting is where it starts for all those programs. Even Ohio State. When they won that game against Notre Dame, they won not because the quarterback was hot. It was because they averaged about 6 or 7 yards a carry. Notre Dame couldn't stop that offensive line. That's the difference. If you recruit like that, you have a chance to win. Now, as a parting point, whatever school you root for, ask yourself this. Just generically, do I feel good about how the program I root for is recruiting offensive line? How's the 26 class going? Are we recruiting at least 3, like bare minimum, every single year? If those answers don't hit the highlights of yes, it's definitely there, like 8 guys in a 2-year window, never 6 guys in a 2-year window or less. As long as you kind of stay away from that, you should be okay. And of course, an occasional elite offensive tackle is always nice as well. But just look at the class that your school signed this past year and look at the one they're building right now. If you put those 2 classes together, could you have a 5-man group that you'd want to trot out there in the playoff? At least hypothetically speaking. That's what recruiting is about. We're projecting. It is hard. And it doesn't matter which recruiting service I went with. I went with 24/7, and I know Andrew and a lot of the different guys at that network. They do a great job, but it's still very, very difficult. And all these ebbs and flows just show you what the difficulty is. But the programs that do well recruiting offensive line, there's no doubt they're the ones that are most likely to make a run. And if your school is not doing so well, maybe you should start asking some questions on why. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Please like and subscribe. We're going to have more of these lists. I'm going to do another one similar to this coming up tomorrow. Going to have Ohio State. Going to talk about Penn State, Oklahoma, Texas, a lot of these other schools too. There's just too many schools that do it in a 30-minute window for our show. So going to have to break it up. But I don't think we're going to have as many surprises tomorrow outside of maybe Oklahoma. Last year was pretty wild for them. They had injuries. But again, that shows you why offensive line recruiting is so important year in, year out. When you have a run of injuries, you need to have experienced players still on your depth chart. Thank you once again, and we will see you again soon here on the Portal Podcast.